I returned from Vancouver after 2 weeks at my mother's bedside, watching her take her final breath. When I got home, I expected the warmth of my wife's embrace, but instead I heard desperate banging coming from beneath the floorboards. I broke the padlock on the basement door and found my wife Catherine filthy, dehydrated, and confused. She had been locked down there for 14 days in the freezing cold. When I asked who did this, she whispered the name of the person we trusted most in this world. Jenny, our own daughter. She said she needed a signature, so I made sure she got exactly what she deserved. If you are watching this, sit down and take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is a nightmare that happened under my own roof. My name is Tom Bennett, and for 70 years I thought I knew what family meant. I was wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respecting your parents is the most basic human duty. The drive from O'Hare Airport to our home in the suburbs of Chicago was a battle against nature itself. The wipers of my old Ford truck were fighting a losing war against the heavy, wet snow that had been falling since noon. I was exhausted. My bones ached with that specific deep fatigue that only comes from grief and sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs. I had just buried my mother in Vancouver. It was done. All I wanted now was to step into my house, smell the apple cinnamon pie that Catherine always baked when she knew I was coming home, and sink into my armchair. I pulled into the driveway, and the headlights cut through the swirling white flakes. The house looked dark. Too dark. It was only 5 in the afternoon, but in a Chicago winter, it might as well have been midnight. I frowned. Catherine usually left the porch light on for me. I told myself she was probably napping. At 68, she did not have the energy she used to, and the stress of my mother's passing had taken a toll on her too. I lugged my suitcase up the icy steps and unlocked the front door. The blast of cold air that hit me should have come from the outside, but it felt like it was coming from inside the house. I stepped in and stomped the snow off my boots. "Catherine," I called out. My voice echoed in the hallway. There was no answer. Just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stood there for a moment, listening to the wind howling outside. Something was wrong. The air in the house was stale. It lacked that warmth, that scent of spices and vanilla that had welcomed me home for 40 years. It smelled cold. It smelled like dust and neglect. I walked into the living room. The thermostat on the wall was set to 60 degrees. Catherine never set it below 72. She got cold easily. "Why would she sit in a freezing house, honey? Are you here?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I went to the kitchen. The sink was dry. There were no dishes in the drying rack, which was impossible because Catherine was meticulous about cleaning up after lunch. I reached for the landline phone on the wall to call her cell, thinking maybe she had gone to the store and got stuck in the snow. The line was dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it. The cord had been yanked out of the wall jack. It was not just unplugged. The plastic casing around the jack was cracked as if someone had ripped it out with force. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I am a retired structural engineer. I look at the world in terms of stress and breaking points. This was a breaking point. I moved into the hallway, and that is when I saw the pictures. The framed photos of our family vacations that lined the staircase were crooked. One had fallen, and the glass was shattered on the floor, but no one had swept it up. Then I heard it. Thump. It was faint. A dull, rhythmic sound. Thump. Thump. I froze. It was coming from beneath my feet. From the basement. My first thought was that an animal had gotten in. Maybe a raccoon seeking shelter from the storm. But the rhythm was too regular. It was deliberate. I moved toward the basement door at the end of the hallway. That door led to my workshop and the laundry area. It was just a standard wooden door. But as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a lock on it. Not the old brass slide bolt I had installed 20 years ago. This was a brand new digital keypad lock, glowing with a faint blue light. I stared at it. I did not install this. Catherine did not know how to use a screwdriver, let alone install a complex electronic deadbolt. Catherine the First shouted, pressing my ear against the wood. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was louder now, desperate. It was the sound of a fist hitting wood, but weak. So weak. Open the door, I yelled. A voice answered me. It was barely a whisper muffled by the thick door, but I knew it. Tom. Help. It was Catherine. Panic exploded in my chest. I punched random numbers into the keypad. Error. I tried our anniversary. Error. I tried her birthday. Error. The lock beeped angrily and flashed red. Hang on, Catherine! I am getting you out! I screamed. I ran to the garage. I did not feel my age anymore. I did not feel the arthritis in my knees. I felt only a blind, terrified rage. I grabbed my 10-pound sledgehammer from the tool rack. The weight of it felt good in my hands. Familiar. I ran back to the hallway. I did not hesitate. I swung the hammer with every ounce of strength I had left. Crack! The wood around the lock splintered. I swung again. The door frame gave way. The digital lock, that piece of high-tech garbage, hung loose by its wires. I kicked the door open and hit the light switch on the wall. The bulb in the ceiling flickered and buzzed to life. The sight that met my eyes will haunt me until the day I die. It was freezing down there, colder than the rest of the house. The unfinished concrete floor was like a sheet of ice. And there in the corner, on a pile of old drop cloths and dirty laundry, lay my wife. She was curled into a fetal position, shivering so violently that her whole body seemed to vibrate. She was wearing her nightgown, which was stained and filthy. Beside her was a plastic bucket that smelled of urine. Empty water bottles were scattered around her like trash. Catherine. I dropped the hammer and scrambled down the stairs, almost tripping over my own feet. I fell to my knees beside her. The smell hit me then. The smell of unwashed, unkempt humanity. The smell of suffering. She flinched when I touched her, raising her hands to cover her face as if she expected me to strike her. No, it is me, it is Tom. I choked out, pulling her into my arms. She was ice cold. Her skin felt like parchment paper, thin and dry. Her eyes were sunken into her skull, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. She looked at me, but there was a haze in her eyes, a confusion that terrified me. Tom, she croaked. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Water, please. I pulled her tight against my chest, trying to transfer my body heat to her. I was crying, but I did not realize it until I felt my hot tears landing on her freezing face. I am here, baby. I am here, I whispered, rocking her back and forth. Who did this? Who put that lock on the door? She gripped my coat with surprising strength. Her knuckles were white, and I saw the dark purple bruises circling her wrists. Bindings. Someone had tied her up. She looked toward the stairs, her eyes wide with terror. She said I was bad, Catherine whispered, her voice trembling. She said I had to sign the papers. Who, Catherine? Who? She swallowed hard, and tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. Jenny, she whispered. Our Jenny. The name hit me harder than the sledgehammer could ever hit that door. Jenny. My little girl. The one whose college tuition I had paid for by working double shifts. The one I had walked down the aisle. She said she needed the house, Tom, Catherine sobbed, burying her face in my coat. She said if I did not sign, I would stay down here forever. I held my wife in that freezing basement, surrounded by the tools I had used to build a life for my family, and I felt something inside me shatter. But in its place, something else formed, something cold and hard and dangerous. I looked at the bruising on my wife's wrists. I looked at the bucket of urine. I looked at the fear in the eyes of the woman I had loved for 45 years. "We are going to the hospital," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And then, I am going to make sure Jenny never hurts anyone ever again." I lifted Catherine into my arms. She was so light, too light. As I carried her up the stairs, away from that hellhole, I heard a car pull into the driveway above. I heard the front door open. "Dad," a voice called out. A voice that used to bring me joy, but now sounded like the hiss of a snake. "Are you home? We saw your truck." It was Jenny, and she had no idea that the father she knew had died in that basement, and the man coming up the stairs was someone else entirely. I carried Catherine into the kitchen and gently placed her on one of the oak chairs we had sat in for thousands of family dinners. The contrast between the warm, familiar room and the shivering, broken woman sitting before me was enough to shatter my heart into dust. Under the bright kitchen lights, the true extent of her condition was horrifyingly clear. Her silver hair, usually neatly brushed, was matted with grime and spiderwebs. Her lips were not just dry, they were fissured like drought-struck earth, bleeding in tiny cracks where the skin had split. I grabbed a glass of water, my hands shaking so badly I spilled half of it on the counter. I held it to her lips. She drank frantically, water streaming down her chin, mixing with the dirt on her neck. She choked, coughing violently, but she kept trying to drink as if she had been walking through a desert. The smell coming off her was overwhelming. It was the sharp, stinging scent of ammonia and stale sweat, the scent of a human being who has been denied basic dignity. It was the smell of a cage. "Catherine," I whispered, wiping her face with a dish towel. "It is okay. You are safe now." She looked up at me, but there was no recognition in her eyes, only a primal, terrified confusion. She pushed the glass away and curled into herself, wrapping her arms around her knees, rocking back and forth on the chair. "No, no, no," she muttered, staring at the refrigerator. "Do not tell Jenny. She will get mad. She will take the light away." My blood ran cold. Take the light away. They had kept her in total darkness. Suddenly, the peace of the house was shattered by the screech of tires in the driveway. It sounded like a getaway car pulling up. Car doors slammed with violent force. Heavy footsteps pounded up the porch stairs. I stood up, positioning myself between Catherine and the door. My hand instinctively reached for the heavy cast-iron skillet on the stove. I did not know what I was going to do, but I knew nobody was touching my wife again. The front door flew open. Jenny marched in, shaking the snow off her expensive fur coat. Her husband Greg followed close behind, looking flustered and angry. They did not look like concerned children rushing to check on an ailing mother. They looked like managers arriving to fix a mistake at a job site. Jenny stopped dead when she saw us in the kitchen. She saw her mother shivering in the chair. She saw the sledgehammer I had dropped by the door. She saw the rage in my eyes. For a second, I thought she would crumble. I thought she would fall to her knees and beg for forgiveness. I thought the daughter I raised, the little girl who used to cry when she found a hurt bird, would reappear. But I was wrong. Jenny did not apologize. She attacked. "Dad, what the hell have you done?" she screamed, throwing her purse on the counter. "You ruined the protocol." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. Protocol? She was talking about locking her mother in a basement like it was a medical procedure. Protocol! I roared, my voice shaking the cabinets. "You locked your mother in a freezing cellar for 2 weeks. She is dehydrated, Jenny. She is starving. Look at her. Look at what you did." Jenny rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes. She walked over to the sink and poured herself a glass of water, ignoring her mother completely. "You have no idea what has been happening here while you were gone, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You were off playing the good son in Vancouver while we were here dealing with reality. Mom is sick. Very sick. I looked at Greg. He stood by the doorway, arms crossed, puffing out his chest, trying to look imposing. She is right, Tom. Greg said, his voice smooth and oily. We did not want to worry you while your mom was dying. But Catherine, she snapped. It is Alzheimer's, the violent kind. I looked back at Catherine. She was still rocking, humming a low, tuneless melody, her eyes fixed on nothing. Alzheimer's. It was impossible. 2 weeks ago we had finished the Sunday crossword together. She was sharp, she was kind. Lies, I spat out. She was fine when I left. That is how it happens, Jenny said, turning to face me, her face twisted into a mask of fake sympathy. It comes on sudden. The doctor called it acute rapid onset dementia. Last week she tried to kill me, Dad. The room went silent. I looked at my daughter. What? She grabbed a carving knife from the counter. Mom attacked me. She cornered me in this very kitchen. She was screaming that I was an imposter. She swung this knife at my face. If Greg had not tackled her, she would have sliced my throat open. I looked at Catherine again. My gentle wife who carried spiders outside in a cup rather than killing them. Could she have done that? The brain is a fragile thing. I had heard stories of people changing overnight. Doubt, that insidious worm, began to burrow into my mind. We called Dr. Alistair immediately, Greg added, stepping forward. He said she is a danger to herself and others. He said until a bed opens up at the secure facility, we had to contain her. We had to keep her somewhere she could not hurt anyone or hurt herself. The basement was the only room with a lock strong enough. Contain her, I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. You treated her like an animal. You did not feed her. We fed her, Jenny snapped, defensive now. She probably threw the food away. That is part of the disease, Dad. She is confused. She forgets to eat. We did everything the doctor said. We were protecting her. And now you just broke her out and traumatized her all over again. Jenny pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and slammed it onto the table. Read it yourself if you do not believe me. I picked up the paper. It was on letterhead from a psychiatric clinic I had never heard of. It had a lot of big medical words: acute psychosis, violent tendencies, immediate containment recommended. It was signed by a Dr. Marcus Alistair. I stared at the paper. The stamp looked official. The signature looked real. My engineering brain, which usually solved problems with logic and math, was misfiring. The evidence was right there. My daughter was telling me my wife was dangerous. My son-in-law was backing her up. Maybe I was the one who was wrong. Maybe I was just an old man who had been away too long and did not understand modern medicine. Maybe my grief for my mother was clouding my judgment. For a moment I wavered. I looked at Jenny and I saw the little girl with pigtails. I saw the daughter I loved. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe that she was not a monster. See, Jenny said, her voice softening just a fraction, sensing my hesitation. We are doing this for her dad. A bed opened up at the Whispering Pines facility this afternoon. We were just coming to get her to take her there. They have professionals. They can help her. Greg moved toward Catherine. Come on, Mom, he said, reaching for her arm. Time to go to the nice place. When Greg touched her, Catherine screamed. It was not a scream of anger. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. She scrambled backward, knocking the chair over, crashing to the floor. She scrambled away from him on her hands and knees, like a crab trying to get behind my legs. No, no, not him, she shrieked, clutching my pant leg. Don, not let him take me. The paper, Tom. The paper. Do not sign the paper. Jenny looked at Greg and nodded. Grab her. No, I shouted, stepping forward. She is not going anywhere. She needs a hospital, not a mental ward. Look at her wrists, Jenny. She is hurt." "We do not have time for this," Jenny hissed. Her mask of concern slipped completely, revealing the cold steel beneath. "If she stays here, she will kill you in your sleep, Dad." "Do you want that? The ambulance is too expensive, and the police will just arrest her for assault if we call them. We are taking her now." Greg lunged past me. He was younger than me, heavier and desperate. He grabbed Catherine by the waist and hoisted her up like a sack of potatoes. She thrashed and wailed, calling my name over and over. "Tom! Tom, help me!" I grabbed Greg's shoulder, trying to pull him back, but Jenny stepped in front of me, shoving me hard in the chest. "Stop it!" she yelled. "You are making it worse. You are incompetent, Dad. You cannot handle this. Let us do the right thing." I stumbled back, hitting the counter. My head spun. The chaos, the noise, the official-looking paper, the conviction in Jenny's voice, it all paralyzed me. For 5 seconds, I did nothing. And in those 5 seconds, they dragged my wife out the front door. I ran to the porch just in time to see Greg shove Catherine into the back seat of their SUV. Jenny slammed the door and jumped into the driver's seat. "We will text you the address," Jenny shouted out the window as she revved the engine. "Go get some sleep, Dad. You look like you are losing it too." The car peeled out of the driveway, sliding slightly on the ice before gripping the pavement and speeding away into the dark, snowy night. I stood there in the freezing wind, watching the taillights disappear. My wife was gone. My daughter had taken her, and I was left holding a piece of paper that said it was all for the best. But as I looked down at that paper in the porch light, something caught my eye. A tiny detail. The date on the doctor's signature was today's date, but the body of the text referred to an examination that happened 2 weeks ago. And then I remembered something else. Catherine had screamed about a paper. "Do not sign the paper." She was not talking about a medical form. I turned and walked back into the empty, silent house. The doubt was still there, but something else was rising up to meet it. A cold, hard suspicion. I was not going to sleep. I was going to find out the truth. And if they had lied to me, God have mercy on their souls, because I certainly would not. I drove my truck through the blizzard like a man possessed. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew where the local ambulance drop-off was. If Catherine was as bad as they said, if she was truly in a state of acute psychosis or physical collapse, they would have to stabilize her at the county hospital before transferring her anywhere else. It was a gamble, but it was the only play I had. When I screeched into the emergency room parking lot, I saw Greg's SUV parked haphazardly near the entrance. I had guessed right. The condition I found her in was too severe for a direct admission to a long-term facility. They had been forced to stop. I burst through the sliding glass doors, bringing a gust of freezing wind and snow with me. The waiting room was chaos, filled with coughing people and crying children, but I cut through the noise like a knife. I marched straight to the reception desk. The nurse behind the high counter looked exhausted, but I did not have time for politeness. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice booming in the sterile room. "Catherine Bennett. My daughter just brought her in." The nurse typed something into her computer without looking up. "Family only, sir, and we are currently stabilizing her. You need to take a seat. I am her husband." I slammed my hand on the counter. "I have been her husband for 45 years. If you do not let me back there right now, I will tear this hospital apart brick by brick until I find her." Security started to move toward me. I braced myself. I was ready to fight. I was ready to go to jail if it meant seeing my wife. But before the guard could grab my arm, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. "It is okay. I have got him." I turned around. It was Dr. Philip Evans. Phil. We had played golf every Sunday for 20 years until his knees gave out. He was the chief of internal medicine, and right now he looked more serious than I had ever seen him. He was not wearing his golf polo. He was in his white coat, and his face was grim. Tom, he said quietly, come with me. He led me past the security guard through the double doors and down a long hallway that smelled of rubbing alcohol and latex. The sounds of the waiting room faded away, replaced by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. Phil stopped outside a private room and turned to face me. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I knew meant he had bad news. I saw Jenny and Greg in the lobby. Tom, Phil said, his voice low. They showed me the paperwork from Dr. Allister. They told me Catherine attacked Jenny with a knife. They told me she has violent Alzheimer's. It is a lie, Phil, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They locked her in the basement. They starved her. You have to believe me. Phil put his glasses back on and looked me dead in the eye. I know, he said. My knees almost buckled with relief. I examined her myself, Tom. Phil continued. I sent Jenny and Greg to fill out admission forms to keep them busy. I needed to show you this before the police or social services get involved. You need to see the truth with your own eyes. He opened the door. Catherine was lying in a hospital bed hooked up to IV bags. The monitors were beeping steadily. They had cleaned her face and she was wearing a hospital gown, but she looked so small, so fragile. I walked to her side and took her hand. It was warmer now, but still rough. Phil walked to the other side of the bed and picked up a chart. Her sodium levels are through the roof, Tom, he said, tapping the paper. Medically speaking, she is suffering from severe hypernatremia caused by extreme dehydration. Based on her kidney function, I would estimate she has not had a drop of water in at least 3 days, maybe 4. 3 days. I looked at the IV drip, knowing it was the only thing keeping her alive. But that is not the worst of it, Phil said. He gently lifted Catherine's arm. He pushed the sleeve of the gown up to her elbow. I gasped. Around her wrists, the skin was not just bruised, it was crushed. There were deep purple and black indentations. But what caught my engineer's eye was the shape of the wounds. They were not irregular blobs like you get from a fall or a grab. They were precise, they were geometric, thin uniform lines that cut deep into the flesh. Falls are random, Tom, Phil said, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. Falls are chaos. These marks are not from falling, and they are not from a human hand holding her down. I leaned in closer, staring at the marks. I recognized that pattern. I had seen it 1,000 times on construction sites. Zip ties, I whispered. Phil nodded. Heavy-duty plastic cable ties. The kind you buy at a hardware store. Someone tied her up, Tom. Someone bound her wrists so tightly it cut off circulation. And judging by the healing stages of the bruises, she was tied up for days at a time. This was not containment for safety. This was torture. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I had to grip the bed rail to stay standing. My daughter. My flesh and blood. She had used industrial cable ties on her own mother. Suddenly, Catherine stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. She let out a soft moan. I leaned down close to her ear. Catherine, it is me. It is Tom. Her eyes opened. They were still glassy, but the terrified haze I had seen at the house was clearing. The fluids were doing their work. She blinked, trying to focus on my face. Tom, she breathed. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. I am here, I said, kissing her forehead. You are safe. Phil is here. She gripped my hand. Her squeeze was weak but urgent. She tried to lift her head but fell back against the pillow. The green paper, she whispered. I frowned. What green paper, Catherine? In the trash, she wheezed. She threw it in the trash. The one with the numbers. I looked at Phil. He shook his head, not understanding. But I listened. I listened with everything I had. She wanted the password. Tom, Catherine continued, tears leaking from her eyes. For the big box in the wall. She said. She said if I did not give it to her, she would leave me in the dark. The big box in the wall. The safe. My safe. I did not give it to her, Catherine said, a faint spark of defiance appearing in her eyes. I told her the wrong one. I told her the birthday password. She closed her eyes again, exhausted by the effort. Phil put a hand on my arm. She needs to rest, Tom. The sedatives are kicking in. I stood up straight. The confusion was gone. The shock was gone. In their place was a cold, hard clarity. I understood everything now. Jenny did not just want to sell the house. She needed access to the safe. And she thought the combination was a date. She thought I was a simple old man who used birthdays for passwords. She was wrong. I looked at my wife's bruised wrists one last time. I imprinted that image into my mind. I wanted to remember it. I wanted it to fuel what I was about to do, Phil, I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. Keep her here. Do not let Jenny or Greg anywhere near this room. Call security. Call the police if you have to. I will, Phil said. Where are you going? I looked at the door. I am going home, I said. I have to find a piece of green paper. And then I am going to prepare a welcome party for my children. I turned and walked out of the room. I did not look back. The man who had walked into that hospital was a worried husband. The man walking out was an engineer who had just discovered a structural failure in his life. And I was going to demolish it. The house stood dark and silent against the snowy backdrop when I pulled into the driveway. Just hours ago, this place had been the scene of my wife's abduction, but now it felt like something else entirely. It felt like a crime scene. I killed the engine and sat in the truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline from the hospital was starting to fade, and in its place a cold, hard resolve was settling into my bones. I was not just a husband anymore. I was an engineer returning to inspect a structural failure. And this failure was catastrophic. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. I did not turn on the main lights. I did not want to alert the neighbors or anyone who might be watching. Instead, I pulled out my heavy-duty flashlight, the one I used for site inspections, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the freezing air. My first destination was the master bedroom. I walked down the hallway, and my boots echoed on the hardwood floor. Each step felt heavy, as if I were carrying the weight of the entire world. I pushed open the bedroom door. The room looked undisturbed at first glance. The bed was made perfectly. The pillows were fluffed. It was a lie. A facade of normalcy designed to hide the rot beneath. I walked straight to the north wall where a large oil painting of the Amalfi Coast hung. Catherine and I had bought it on our 25th anniversary. It was her favorite view. But as I shined my light on it, I saw that it was crooked. Just a fraction of an inch off level. To anyone else, it would be invisible. To me, it was a screaming alarm. I lifted the painting from the wall and set it gently on the floor. Behind it was the wall safe. I had installed this safe myself 15 years ago. It was not a store-bought tin box. It was a custom reinforced steel unit anchored directly into the house's framing studs. I ran my fingers over the keypad and the dial. There were scratches, deep jagged gouges in the hardened steel around the door gap. I leaned in closer, inspecting the damage with my flashlight. These were not scratches from a key. These were pry marks. Someone had taken a crowbar or a heavy screwdriver and tried to force the door open. They had used leverage. They had used torque. They had tried to break the locking mechanism with brute force. I traced the marks with my thumb. The steel was scarred, but it had held. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I had built this thing to withstand fire and thieves. I never imagined the thieves would be my own family, but the steel did not care about bloodlines. It only cared about physics. And physically, they had failed to get in. That explained the torture. That explained the zip ties on Catherine's wrists. They tried to break into the safe, and when they failed, they turned their violence on the only person who might know the combination. They tried to break her instead of the box. I stood up and left the bedroom, my jaw set so tight my teeth ached. I moved to the home office down the hall. This was where I kept the paperwork of our lives. The mortgage deeds, the insurance policies, the pension statements. I swept the flashlight beam across the room. The desk drawers were closed, but not all the way. One was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. Empty. I pulled open the file cabinet in the corner. The hanging folders were there, but they were light. Too light. I flipped through them. The folder labeled Life Insurance was empty. The folder labeled Retirement Accounts was empty. The folder for the house deed was gone. They had cleaned us out. Or at least they had taken everything they needed to claim ownership of our assets. They did not just want the cash in the safe. They wanted the legacy. They wanted to erase my name from everything I had built and replace it with their own. I sat down in my leather office chair, and the leather creaked in the silence. I felt violated. It is a specific kind of pain to know that while I was holding my mother's hand as she took her last breath, my daughter was here rifling through my files, calculating how much my life was worth. Then I remembered Catherine's words in the hospital. The green paper. She said she saw it in the trash. I looked at the small metal wastebasket under the desk. It was empty. Jenny must have emptied it to hide her tracks. I got up and went to the kitchen. The main trash can under the sink was clean too. They had been thorough. But I knew my daughter. She was arrogant. She was the type of person who believed she was smarter than everyone else and that arrogance always led to mistakes. I went to the garage. The large recycling bin was sitting by the door ready for pickup tomorrow morning. I lifted the lid. It was half full of cardboard boxes and junk mail. I started digging. I moved aside pizza boxes and empty wine bottles. Expensive wine bottles. They had been drinking my vintage Cabernet while they starved my wife. Near the bottom of the bin, I found it. A crumpled ball of light green paper. My hands shook as I smoothed it out on the hood of my truck. It was not a wrapper. It was a legal document, a draft. The green tint meant it was a copy from a law firm's printer. I shined my light on the text and began to read. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner Jennifer Bennett. Respondent Gregory Bennett. I read the paragraphs detailing the division of assets and debts. And there it was. The motive. The reason for the cruelty. The reason for the desperation. They were broke. Both of them. The document listed debts that made my head spin. Greg owed nearly $500,000 to creditors listed as private equity firms, which I knew was polite legal speak for loan sharks. Jenny's business was listed as having zero assets and massive tax liabilities. But the most damning part was the timeline. The divorce draft was dated 3 weeks ago. They were not a happy couple trying to help mom and dad. They were two rats trapped in a sinking ship, trying to gnaw through the hull to steal the cargo before they drowned. They hated each other. This document proved it. They were only sticking together long enough to plunder my estate to pay off their debts, and then they would turn on each other. I stared at the paper. This was the smoking gun. This proved that their sudden concern for Catherine's health was a lie. It proved that they had a financial motive to declare us incompetent and seize control. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my inside jacket pocket next to my heart. For a brief moment, I considered calling the police right then. I had the evidence of the assault on Catherine. I had the evidence of the attempted robbery of the safe. I had the motive in my pocket. But I stopped. If I called the police now, Greg and Jenny would get lawyers. They would claim the bruises on Catherine were self-inflicted. They would claim the safe damage was old. They would say the divorce papers were just a draft and irrelevant. They might get a slap on the wrist, a plea deal, probation. No, that was not enough. Not after what I saw in that basement. Not after seeing my wife drinking water like a dying animal. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed a confession. I remembered the camera system. I had told myself in the hospital that I would check it, but now standing here in the garage with the cold wind seeping in under the door, I realized it was my only weapon. I walked back into the house and locked the door behind me. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, mechanical precision. I was going to rebuild the trap they had set, and I was going to make sure they were the ones who stepped into it. I headed for the attic where the server for the old security cameras was hidden. As I climbed the ladder, I made a silent promise to the empty house. By this time tomorrow, the people who did this would wish they had never been born. I was done being a father. Tonight, I was the hunter. I stood in the shadowed hallway, staring up at the innocuous plastic vent cover near the ceiling. To anyone else visiting our home, it was just a standard return air vent for the HVAC system. It blended perfectly into the crown, molding a boring piece of infrastructure that no one would ever give a second glance. But as I looked at it, my heart pounded with a mixture of dread and grim anticipation, because I knew what was hidden behind that plastic grill. Years ago, we had a housekeeper named Marta. She was efficient, but small things started going missing. Silver spoons, a diamond earring, cash from my wallet. Catherine was too kind-hearted to accuse her without proof, so I did what any engineer with trust issues would do. I installed a hardwired surveillance system. I did not buy one of those cheap Wi-Fi cameras that store data in the cloud where anyone can hack it. I built a closed-circuit system myself, running high-definition cables through the walls to a hidden server in the attic. We caught Marta stealing on the first day and fired her immediately. I intended to take the cameras down, but life got busy, and I simply disconnected the power supply to the server. I never told Jenny. I never told Greg. Why would I? It was my house and my security, and now that secret was the only thing standing between justice and oblivion. I went to the garage and retrieved the aluminum folding ladder. My movements were stiff and mechanical. I felt like a robot programmed for a single mission. I carried the ladder to the hallway and set it up under the attic hatch. I climbed up, pushing the heavy drywall panel aside, and hoisted myself into the crawl space. The attic was freezing. The wind howled outside, rattling the roof shingles, and the air up here smelled of fiberglass insulation and dry ancient wood. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam cut through the swirling dust motes. I crawled on my hands and knees across the wooden joists, careful not to put my weight on the drywall ceiling below. In the far corner, tucked behind the brick chimney stack, was a black metal box about the size of a microwave. My hands were shaking as I brushed away a thick layer of dust. This was the nerve center. I prayed the hard drive had not seized up from the cold or the years of inactivity. I pulled the power cable from my pocket and plugged it into the battery backup unit I had brought with me. I held my breath and flipped the switch. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a small red LED blinked, then yellow, and finally a steady green. The cooling fan whirred to life, a low hum that sounded to me like a choir of angels. The system was booting up. The cameras, which drew power directly from this central hub, were live. I opened my laptop and connected it to the server's diagnostic port with a USB cable. I sat there perched on a wooden beam in the freezing dark and typed in my admin password. The screen filled with a grid of 4 camera feeds: the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and the basement. I did not want to watch. God help me, I wanted to close the laptop and burn the house down rather than see what I knew was coming. But I had to witness it. I had to bear witness to my wife's suffering. I navigated to the archive folder. The motion sensors had triggered recording every time there was movement in the house. I scrolled back to the date I left for Vancouver. I clicked play. On the screen, I saw myself hugging Catherine goodbye. I saw me walking out the door with my suitcase. I saw Catherine lock the door and go to the kitchen to make tea. She looked sad but peaceful. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. Jenny walked in. She did not knock. She did not say hello. She marched into the kitchen with a look on her face that I had never seen before. It was a look of pure, predatory malice. Catherine turned around, smiling, surprised to see her daughter. I watched in silence as Jenny grabbed Catherine's arm. I saw the confusion on my wife's face turn to shock. Jenny was shouting something, but I had the audio muted at first. I turned it up. "You are going to sign it, Mom!" Jenny screamed. "We are not waiting for Dad to die. We need the money now." Catherine tried to pull away. Greg entered the frame. He did not look hesitant. He looked eager. He grabbed Catherine's other arm. They dragged her toward the basement door. My wife, my gentle, fragile wife, fought them. She dug her heels into the linoleum. She kicked. But she was no match for two younger people fueled by greed. I saw Greg shove her. I saw her tumble down the wooden stairs. I gasped aloud in the attic, my breath pluming in the cold air. I fast-forwarded. I could not watch every second or I would lose my mind. I skipped to 3 days later. The basement camera switched to infrared night vision, turning everything into a ghostly green and black. Catherine was huddled in the corner. Her hands were bound with the zip ties. Jenny walked down the stairs, holding a clipboard and a pen. "Sign the power of attorney," Jenny demanded. Catherine shook her head, weak but defiant. "I am waiting for Tom," she whispered. Jenny did not hesitate. She raised her hand and slapped her mother across the face. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed through the laptop speakers. Catherine's head snapped back. Jenny grabbed her hair, pulling her face up. "Tom is not coming back," Jenny hissed. "He is going to put you in a home anyway. Sign it and I will give you water." I paused the video. I put my head between my knees and dry heaved. The rage was so intense it felt like physical pain. My daughter had used water as a weapon. She had weaponized basic survival against the woman who gave her birth. I forced myself to watch more. I needed to see Greg. I needed to know the full extent of his involvement. I found a clip from 2 days ago. Greg walked down the stairs carrying a plastic tray. There was a bowl of oatmeal on it. He set it on the floor a few feet away from Catherine. She crawled toward it, her bound hands making it difficult to move. Just as she reached for the bowl, Greg kicked it. The oatmeal splattered across the dirty concrete floor. Greg threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, hyena-like sound. "Oops," he said. "Clumsy old hag. Better eat it off the floor before the rats get it." He turned to the camera, not knowing I was watching him across time and space, and smirked. He looked right at the lens and said to Jenny, who was out of frame, "She is breaking, babe. Give it one more day." I skipped to the final clip. Yesterday morning. They were in the kitchen upstairs, drinking my coffee, eating my food. "The old man is coming back tomorrow," Greg said, checking his phone. "If we do not get that signature by noon, we are screwed. The loan sharks are not going to extend the deadline again." Jenny was pacing the kitchen. "I will make her sign," she said, her voice cold and flat. "One way or another. I do not care if I have to break her fingers. I do not care if I have to drug her until she cannot hold the pen. We are getting that house." I stopped the video. I had seen enough. I did not just have suspicion anymore. I did not just have a green piece of paper from the trash. I had a felony on tape. I had kidnapping. I had assault. I had elder abuse. I had conspiracy. I sat there in the freezing attic and plugged in 3 external hard drives. I initiated the copy sequence. I was going to make sure this evidence existed in 3 different places. One for the police, one for my lawyer, and one for me. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I felt a strange transformation. The grief for my mother was gone. The heartbreak over my daughter was gone. All that was left was the cold calculation of the engineer. I was looking at a broken structure, a bridge that had collapsed and killed innocent people, and I was going to bulldoze the rubble. I watched the percentage climb. 98, 99, 100% complete. I ejected the drives and put them in my pocket. I shut down the laptop. I crawled back across the joists and climbed down the ladder. When I stood up in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my face was pale, but there was a fire burning behind my pupils. It was the fire of a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose. They wanted a war. They wanted to play games with locks and cages. Well, I was the one who built this house. I knew where the skeletons were buried because I was about to make room for 2 more. I checked my watch. I had 12 hours before they came back for their dinner party. 12 hours to turn this house into a trap that they would never escape. I climbed down from the attic and locked the access panel. My knees popped and my back ached, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold fury settling in my gut. I had the evidence of the crime stored safely in my pocket, but I still needed the final piece of the puzzle. I knew they were broke based on the divorce draft I found in the trash, but bankruptcy alone does not turn a daughter into a torturer. There had to be something else. Something immediate. Something terrifying that was driving them to such extreme cruelty. I needed to know exactly who was pulling their strings. I went into my study and poured myself 2 fingers of scotch. I did not drink it. I just held the glass, letting the amber liquid catch the light while I stared at the phone. It was almost midnight, but I knew one person who would still be awake. Frank Miller. We had worked together on the massive Skyway Bridge project back in the 90s. I was the lead engineer, and Frank was the forensic accountant, brought in to find out where $3 million of concrete budget had disappeared to. He found it in 2 days. The man could follow a digital paper trail through a hurricane. I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice raspy from decades of cigars. Tom Bennett. Frank rumbled. To what do I owe the pleasure? It is late for a man of your vintage. I need a favor, Frank, I said, skipping the pleasantries. And I need it tonight. There was a pause. I could hear the click of a lighter on the other end. Talk to me, he said. I need a full financial workup on my son-in-law, Gregory Grant, and my daughter, Jennifer. I need to know everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, investments, and most importantly, châtiment debts, especially the kind that do not show up on a standard credit report. Frank let out a long, slow exhale. You think they are in trouble? I think they are drowning, Frank, I said. And they are trying to use my life jacket to save themselves. Give me an hour, he said. I sat in the dark study listening to the grandfather clock tick, tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second felt like a countdown. I thought about the times I had bailed Jenny out when she was younger. The credit card bill in college. The car repair she could not afford. I had always opened my wallet. I had always been the safety net. Why did she not come to me this time? Why did she choose violence instead of asking for help? The phone rang exactly 58 minutes later. I have sent a secure email to your encrypted server, Frank said, his voice serious. You are not going to like this, Tom. It is ugly. I opened my laptop and clicked on the file. Rows of numbers and red ink filled the screen. Walk me through it, I said, putting the phone on speaker. Let us start with the husband, Frank said. Gregory. He fancies himself a crypto investor. About 6 months ago, he put everything they had into a new exchange called Coin Vault. He even took out a second mortgage on their house to double down. I remember Greg talking about digital currency at Thanksgiving. He called me a dinosaur for keeping my money in municipal bonds. CoinVault was a Ponzi scheme. Tom Frank continued. The founders disappeared 2 weeks ago with $2 billion of investor money. Greg lost everything. But that is not the worst part. To try and make his money back quickly, he borrowed from a private lending group called Omega Capital. I know that name, I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. That is not a bank. That is a front for the energetic loan sharks operating out of the South Side. Bingo, Frank said. He borrowed $450,000 at 20% monthly interest. He missed the first payment last week. My sources say Omega Capital does not send collection letters. They send guys with baseball bats. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Monday. The deadline is this coming Monday, Tom Frank said, confirming my fears. If he does not have the cash by noon on Monday, they are going to start breaking legs. Or worse. That explained the rush. That explained why they could not wait for the normal legal process. They needed liquid cash, and they needed it immediately. What about Jenny, I asked. She has her boutique. She always bragged about how well it was doing. Smoke and mirrors, Frank said. I pulled the corporate filings. That boutique has been insolvent for 8 months. She has been funding the overhead with high-interest business credit cards. She is sitting on $200,000 in debt just to keep the lights on and the appearance of success alive. She declared bankruptcy secretly last week, but the filing is sealed. She is terrified the social circle in her country club will find out she is a failure. I closed my eyes. The picture was complete. Greg was terrified of being killed by loan sharks. Jenny was terrified of being humiliated by her peers. They were a perfect storm of desperation and narcissism. And sitting right in the middle of their storm was my house, my savings, and my wife. They saw us as a piggy bank, Tom Frank said softly. They needed your assets to clear the ledger. They probably planned to liquidate your portfolio, pay off the sharks and the banks, and put you and Catherine in a state-funded facility. Thank you, Frank, I said, my voice hoarse. Send me the bill. There is no bill for this, Frank said. Just watch your back. People like that are dangerous because they are cornered animals. I hung up the phone. I stared at the screen. $450,000. That was the price of my wife's dignity. That was the price of my trust. They were willing to torture their own mother to cover up their stupidity and greed. A vibration on the desk startled me. It was my cell phone. A text message notification lit up the screen. It was from Jenny. Dad, the message read, "We are so worried about you being alone in that big house. Greg and I are coming over for dinner tomorrow night around 7. We are bringing Mr. Stone, the lawyer. He has found a way to expedite Mom's treatment, but we need your help with the paperwork. We will bring lasagna. Love you." I stared at the words. Love you. She typed those letters with the same fingers she used to slap her mother. She offered lasagna to the father she planned to rob. I did not reply immediately. I let the silence stretch out. I looked at the divorce papers on my desk. I looked at the hard drives with the video evidence. I looked at the financial report on the screen. They thought they were coming to a victory dinner. They thought they were coming to manipulate a confused, grieving old man into signing away his life's work. They thought they were going to clear their debts and walk away clean, leaving me and Catherine to rot. I picked up the phone and typed a reply. My thumbs moved steadily over the keypad. "Sounds good, Jenny," I wrote. "I will see you at 7. I have made a decision about the house." I hit send. I sat back in my chair and finished the scotch in one swallow. It burned going down, but it felt good. It felt like fuel. They were coming tomorrow. The loan sharks were coming Monday. The clock was ticking for everyone. But what Jenny and Greg did not know was that I had reset the time. I was not just going to stop them. I was going to let them walk right into the machinery of their own destruction. I was going to use their greed against them, just like a lever in a complex machine. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the snowy driveway where they would park their car tomorrow. "Come on over, kids," I whispered to the empty room. "Come get what you think you deserve, because I have prepared a severance package for you that you will never forget." I turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. But I did not go to sleep. There was work to do. I had a dinner party to prepare for, and the main course was going to be cold, hard justice. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:00. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the silence of the house I had spent the last hour fortifying. I stood in front of the hallway mirror for one last inspection. The man looking back at me was not the furious husband who had broken down a door with a sledgehammer. He was not the sharp engineer who had just uncovered a financial conspiracy. I had mussed my hair to look disheveled. I had buttoned my flannel shirt incorrectly, missing a hole near the top. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my posture, until I looked like I had shrunk 2 inches. I practiced a tremor in my right hand. It was a performance and my life depended on selling it. "Showtime," I whispered to my reflection. I shuffled to the door, dragging my feet slightly. I unlocked it with fumbling fingers, making sure they could hear me struggling with the latch from the outside. When I finally pulled it open, I blinked rapidly as if the porch light hurt my eyes. Jenny stood there holding an aluminum tray of lasagna covered in foil. Greg was behind her, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. And beside them stood a man I did not know. He was short with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my truck, but somehow still looked cheap. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. "Hi, Dad," Jenny said, pitching her voice high and sweet, the way one talks to a toddler or a very old dog. "We brought dinner." I stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. My hand shook as I gestured, and I saw Greg's eyes track the movement. He smirked. He saw weakness. "Good." "Come in," I wheezed, letting a slight cough rattle in my chest. I have been waiting. It is so quiet here without your mother." "We know, Dad," Jenny said, breezing past me. She smelled of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. "That is why we are here, to help you fix everything." They marched into the living room, and Jenny set the lasagna on the coffee table without bothering to ask for a plate. She did not care about feeding me. The food was just a prop. "Dad." "This is Mr. Stone," Jenny said, pointing to the man in the suit. "He is a specialist in elder care law. He is doing us a huge favor by making a house call this late." Mr. Stone stepped forward and offered a hand that felt like a cold, dead fish. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I am so sorry to hear about your wife's condition. These situations are incredibly difficult. My job is to make sure you do not have to carry this burden alone." I nodded, looking down at the floor, playing the part of the overwhelmed, grieving husband. "Thank you," I mumbled. I do not know what to do. The doctors said she was violent. My Catherine. Violent. I cannot believe it. "It is the disease," Mr. Bennett Stone said, sitting on the edge of my sofa, opening his briefcase. "It changes people. And unfortunately, it changes their legal status too. Right now, your wife is in a state of incapacity. And you, if I may be blunt, are not getting any younger. The state could step in. They could freeze your assets. They could put your wife in a state-run ward where the care is, well, let us just say it is not what she deserves." I looked up, my eyes wide with feigned panic. "A state ward," I stammered. No, she needs the best. I have money. We have savings." "That is the problem," Dad Greg chimed in. He was pacing near the fireplace, looking at the antique clock on the mantel. He was vibrating with anxiety. "You cannot access the joint accounts if Mom is incapacitated without a court order. It could take months, years even. By then, the money will be gone to lawyers and court fees. I let my mouth hang open slightly, pretending to be unable to process this information. Months, I repeated. But what do we do? Jenny sat next to me on the sofa. She put a hand on my knee. Her palm was hot and clammy. We have a solution, Dad, she said softly. Mr. Stone drafted a document. It is called a durable power of attorney. It essentially lets Greg and me step in and handle the heavy lifting. We can talk to the banks. We can pay the hospital bills. We can sell this big empty house that you cannot take care of anymore and get you and Mom into that luxury suite at Whispering Pines. Mr. Stone pulled a thick document from his briefcase. It was bound in blue paper. He laid it on the coffee table, pushing aside the cold lasagna. It gives your children the legal authority to act as your agents, Stone explained, uncapping a gold fountain pen. It is standard procedure. It just means you can relax and focus on your health while they handle the business. I reached for the document. My hand trembled violently and the paper shook as I held it. I pretended to struggle to read the fine print without my reading glasses. I scanned the paragraphs. It was not standard. It was predatory. I grant my agents full and unlimited authority to sell, transfer, and liquidate all real estate and personal property. I grant access to all safety deposit boxes and vaults. I waive my right to revoke this power without a competency hearing. It was a death warrant for my freedom. If I signed this, they could sell the house tomorrow, empty my bank accounts by noon, and dump me in a roadside motel with nothing but the clothes on my back. I looked up at Jenny. She was watching me with an intensity that was terrifying. Her eyes were not filled with love. They were filled with calculation. She was counting the money already. It seems very comprehensive, I said, my voice cracking. It has to be Dad, Jenny said, squeezing my knee so hard it hurt. The banks are strict. If we miss even one clause, they might deny the funds for Mom's treatment. You want Mom to get treated, right? Of course, I whispered. Then sign it, Greg said. He had stopped pacing and was looming over me. Just sign the damn thing, Tom, so we can get started. We are losing time. I knew exactly what time he was worried about. The loan shark deadline on Monday. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. I lowered the nib to the paper. I saw Jenny hold her breath. I saw Greg lean in. I saw Stone smirk. Then I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the table, rolling off the edge onto the rug. I cannot, I said, burying my face in my hands. What do you mean you cannot? Greg snapped, his voice rising. My hands are shaking too much. I sobbed, forcing tears into my eyes. I am so confused. My mother just died. My wife is gone. You are talking about selling the house. It is too much. I need to pray. I promised Catherine I would never make a big decision without praying on it first. Jenny's face hardened. The sweet daughter mask slipped for a second. Dad, we do not have time for prayers. This needs to be filed tomorrow morning. I looked up at her, putting all my years of life experience into looking pathetic. Please, Jenny, I begged. Just one night. Let me sleep on it. Let me pray. I will sign it tomorrow. I promise. Come back tomorrow night for dinner. I will cook. We will sign it then. Mr. Stone looked at his watch and then at Jenny. He gave a microscopic nod. He knew that forcing an emotionally unstable man to sign under duress could invalidate the contract later. He was a crook, but he was a careful crook. One day, Stone said, "But Mr. Bennett, I must warn you. Every hour we wait is an hour your wife goes without proper representation." Jenny stood up abruptly. She was furious, but she was trying to hide it. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. But Dad, listen to me. She leaned down until her face was inches from mine. "If you do not sign this tomorrow, I cannot promise that Dr. Allister will keep Mom in the VIP wing. If the payment does not go through, they might transfer her to the general ward. And you know what happens in those places. Patients get lost. They get hurt. It was a threat, plain and simple. Sign or your wife suffers." I looked at her, and for the first time I did not see my child. I saw a stranger, a dangerous, desperate stranger. "I understand," I whispered. "I will sign. Tomorrow. We will see ourselves out." Greg grunted, grabbing his coat. They walked to the door, leaving the unsigned papers on the table. They left the lasagna too. As the front door clicked shut, I sat there for a long moment, listening to their car start up and drive away. Then I stopped shaking. I sat up straight. I wiped the fake tears from my face and picked up the fountain pen from the rug. I looked at the document one last time. "Unlimited authority," I read aloud. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. I tossed the blue folder into the flames. I watched the edges curl and blacken, watched the legal jargon turn to ash. "You want unlimited authority," I said to the empty room. "Tomorrow you are going to get exactly that. But not the kind you think." I went to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept my tools. I took out a drill, a box of heavy-duty screws, and a spool of high-tension wire. I had 24 hours. I had a house to rig. I had a trap to set. And when they came back tomorrow, they were not going to find a helpless old man praying for salvation. They were going to find a father ready to teach them the final and most painful lesson of their lives. The silence that filled the house after they left was heavy, but it was no longer the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a hunter waiting in a blind. I locked the front door and immediately dropped the stoop of the frail old man. My back straightened and my hands stopped shaking. There was no time to rest. I had 24 hours to turn my suburban home into a fortress and a trap. My first move was to secure the legal perimeter. I walked into my study and dialed the private number of George Harrison. George had been my lawyer for 30 years. He handled everything from my business contracts to my mother's estate. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, but he was my shark. He picked up on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "George, it is Tom," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Do not hang up. I need you to listen very carefully." I told him everything. I told him about the basement. I told him about the bruises on Catherine's wrists. I told him about the Ponzi scheme and the loan sharks. I heard his breathing change on the other end of the line, shifting from sleepy annoyance to sharp, professional alertness. "I am calling the district attorney," Tom George said. "We can have them arrested tonight." "No," I said. "An arrest is too good for them. They will make bail. They will hire expensive defense attorneys using money they stole from me. I need this to be airtight, George. I need them to hang themselves." I explained my plan. There was a long silence on the line. "It is risky," Tom George said finally. "If you entrap them incorrectly, it could backfire." "It is not entrapment if they break into my house to rob me, George," I said. "I am just leaving the door unlocked. I need you here tomorrow night. I need a witness who can draft a confession on the spot." "I will be there," George said. Next, I called Sheriff Mike Miller. Mike and I had served on the town council together. He was a good man, a man who believed in right and wrong, not just legal and illegal. When I told him what my daughter had done to her mother, I heard a sound I had not heard in years. The sound of a grown man choking back tears of rage. "I will have a squad car parked just out of sight at the end of your street from 6 o'clock onwards," Mike promised. "The second you give the signal, we break the door down." With the law on my side, I turned my attention to the bait. I knew Greg and Jenny were desperate. The financial report Frank sent me proved they were drowning. But desperation makes people cautious. Greed makes them reckless. I needed to turn their desperation into blinding greed. I sat down at my computer and opened a spreadsheet program. I spent 40 years looking at bank statements and financial audits, so forging one was disturbingly easy. I created a document that looked exactly like a monthly statement from a high-yield offshore savings account. I put the account holder's name as Thomas and Catherine Bennett. Then I typed in the balance. $2,400,000. It was a lie. A beautiful, glittering lie. I printed it out on high-quality bond paper. I folded it carefully and placed it inside an old leather bankbook I kept in my desk. I walked into the kitchen. I knew exactly where to put it. Earlier, when I was scanning the room, I noticed a tiny red light blinking inside the smoke detector above the island. Greg must have installed a pinhole camera months ago to spy on us. I stood directly under the smoke detector. I pulled the leather book out of my pocket. I opened it slowly, letting the light hit the page so the camera could clearly see the number 2.4 million. I traced the number with my finger, acting like a senile old man counting his coins. Then I smiled a confused, happy smile and left the book right there on the counter in plain sight. I knew Greg was watching. I knew that right now in their townhouse 10 miles away, he was zooming in on that video feed. I knew he was grabbing Jenny's arm and pointing at the screen, screaming that their salvation was sitting right there on my kitchen island. That fake bank book was the cheese and the mousetrap was the basement. I walked down the hallway to the door I had smashed open earlier. The basement door. I carried my toolbox and a stack of heavy steel brackets. I was an engineer. I knew how to build things to last. But tonight, I was building something to hold. I examined the door frame. The wood was splintered from my sledgehammer. I stripped it away. I replaced the standard strike plate with a reinforced steel housing that went 6 inches deep into the wall stud. I installed a new deadbolt. But this was not a normal lock. This was a double-cylinder deadbolt. It keyed from both sides. That meant if you were inside and the door was locked, you could not get out without a key. I checked the ventilation. I did not want them to suffocate. I was not a murderer. I was a father teaching a lesson. The HVAC vents were clear. It would be cold down there. Damp. Uncomfortable. But they would have air. They would have exactly as much comfort as they had given their mother. I spent an hour reinforcing the hinges. I welded the pins so they could not be popped out from the inside. When I was done, that door was stronger than the walls around it. It was a vault. I stepped inside the small dark room. The smell of ammonia was still faint in the air, despite my cleaning. I sat down on the cold concrete floor right where I had found Catherine, curled up in her own filth. I closed my eyes and let the darkness wash over me. I tried to imagine what she felt. The fear, the confusion, calling out for the daughter she loved, only to hear the lock click shut. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I opened it to a small cracked photograph tucked behind my driver's license. It was a picture of Jenny when she was 7 years old. She was sitting on my shoulders at the county fair, eating a stick of cotton candy larger than her head. She was laughing. Her eyes were bright and innocent. I looked at that picture and felt a physical pain in my chest like a heart attack. I loved that little girl. I would have died for that little girl. I worked double shifts in the freezing rain to buy her braces. I drove her to piano lessons. I chased away the boys who broke her heart. Where did she go? I ran my thumb over the photo. Tears pricked my eyes hot and stinging. How did that laughing child turn into a woman who would tie her mother with zip ties? Was it my fault? Did I give her too much? Did I shelter her from the cruelty of the world so she never learned to earn anything? I sat there in the dark, wrestling with the ghost of the daughter I once knew. Part of me, the father part, wanted to call this whole thing off. Wanted to write her a check and tell her to run away before the loan sharks caught her. Wanted to save her one last time. But then I looked at the floor. In the corner near the drain, I saw something I had missed earlier. A small piece of blue plastic. The cut end of a zip tie. The image of Catherine's bruised wrists flashed in my mind. the sound of her begging for water. The father in me died in that moment, or maybe he just went into hibernation deep inside a cave of grief. The man who stood up from that concrete floor was not a father. He was a judge. He was a jury. And tomorrow night, he would be the executioner. I pocketed the photo. I walked out of the basement and tested the door. I swung it shut. It made a solid, heavy thud like a coffin lid closing. I turned the key. The bolt slid home with a smooth, final click. Perfect. I went back upstairs. The house was quiet. The trap was set. The bait was laid. The cage was ready. I walked to the window and looked out at the falling snow. It was piling up, covering the world in a blanket of white. It looked peaceful. But underneath the snow, the ground was frozen hard as stone. Tomorrow night, the snow would be stained with the wreckage of my family. But it had to be done. A cancer does not care if you love it. It only knows how to consume. And you do not negotiate with cancer. You cut it out. I turned off the lights and went to bed. I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who has made his peace with war. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the world outside in a suffocating layer of white silence. But inside my kitchen, the air was hot and thick with tension. The clock on the wall ticked toward 7. I had set the table with the good china, the plates Catherine loved, the ones with the delicate blue rims that we only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas. It felt fitting. This was a holiday of sorts. It was the day of judgment. When the doorbell rang, it did not sound like a greeting. It sounded like a summons. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump, letting the years crash down on my spine until I looked small and defeated. I shuffled to the door and opened it. Jenny and Greg stood there, and the sight of them made my stomach turn. They were dressed for a celebration. Jenny wore a black dress and pearls, looking like she was going to a gala, not a family dinner, to discuss her mother's institutionalization. Greg wore a crisp shirt and held a bottle of expensive champagne by the neck. "Hey, Dad," Jenny said, breezing past me with a gust of cold air and expensive perfume. "We are right on time." "We brought the good stuff," Tom Gregg said, flashing a grin that did not reach his terrified eyes. "Veuve Clicquot. Figured we should have a toast. To new beginnings." I closed the door, locking it with a click that was just a little too loud. New beginnings. I repeated, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "Yes, I suppose so." They walked into the kitchen, and I saw it happen immediately. Greg's eyes darted around the room, scanning surfaces like a radar. And then he froze. His gaze landed on the kitchen island, right under the smoke detector, where I had left the leather bank book open. I saw his throat move as he swallowed. I saw him nudge Jenny with his elbow. She looked. Her eyes widened. They saw the number I had forged. $2.4 million. The greed that washed over their faces was so naked, so ugly, it was hard to look at. It was the look of a predator that has just realized the prey is fatter than expected. They exchanged a glance, a silent communication of excitement that made my skin crawl. They thought they had hit the jackpot. They thought all their problems, the loan sharks, the bankruptcy, the shame, were about to be wiped away by my signature. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the table. "I made a roast. It is not as good as your mother's, but I tried." We sat. The sound of cutlery scraping against porcelain was the only noise in the room. Greg was vibrating with nervous energy. He kept checking his phone, which he had placed face down on the table. Every time it buzzed, he flinched. Jenny barely touched her food. She just watched me, her eyes tracking my every movement, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I chewed the meat slowly, forcing myself to swallow. I needed to do this one last thing. I needed to offer them one last chance to be human. I needed to know for sure that there was nothing left of the child I raised. Jenny, I said, breaking the silence. She looked up, startled. What is it, Dad? I was looking at the scar on your knee. I lied. Do you remember how you got that? She sighed, rolling her eyes. Dad, can we focus? You were 7. I continued, ignoring her dismissal. You were riding that red Schwinn bike I bought you for your birthday. You were going too fast down Miller's Hill. You hit a patch of gravel and went flying. I watched her face, looking for a flicker of softness. A memory. Anything. I ran down that hill so fast I lost a shoe. I said, my voice soft. You were screaming. There was so much blood. I picked you up and carried you all the way home. You were crying and you asked me, Daddy, am I going to die? And I told you, not on my watch, baby girl. Daddy has got you. I leaned forward, staring into her eyes. I cleaned that wound, I said. I sat up all night holding your hand because you were afraid to sleep. I would have done anything to take that pain away from you, Jenny. Anything. The room went quiet. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw something shift in her expression. A hesitation. A memory of love. But then Greg's phone buzzed. A long, angry vibration against the wood of the table. Greg snatched it up. He read the screen, and all the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like gray putty. He looked at me, and the fear in his eyes turned into aggression. That is a touching story, Tom, Greg snapped. Really heartwarming, but we are not here to walk down memory lane. We have business to handle. Jenny's face hardened instantly. The moment was gone. The daughter was gone. Greg is right. Dad, she said, her voice cold and flat. Stop living in the past. It is pathetic. Mom is sick. You are overwhelmed. We need to fix this now. She reached into her purse and pulled out the blue folder. The new copy of The Power of Attorney. She slapped it onto the table between the roast beef and the untouched salad. Sign it, she said. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at her. You do not care about the bike, I asked quietly. You do not care that I carried you. I care that you are being difficult, she hissed. I care that we have a lawyer waiting to file this first thing in the morning. I care about saving this family's future, which you seem determined to ruin with your indecision. Greg stood up. He could not sit still anymore. He walked behind my chair, looming over me. Sign the paper, Tom, he said, his voice tight with panic. Do not make this hard. Just pick up the pen and sign your name. I looked at the phone in his hand. Bad news, I asked, pointing to the screen. It is work, Greg lied. Just a client. But I need to get back to them. We all have lives, Dad. We cannot sit here all night listening to your old war stories. I knew it was not a client. It was Omega Capital. It was a threat. They probably told him that if he did not have the money by tomorrow noon, they would start breaking fingers. I reached out and pulled the folder toward me. I opened it. The crisp white pages were filled with legal jargon that amounted to theft. I grant my agents full authority. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my fountain pen. It was a heavy brass pen that Catherine had given me when I retired. It felt substantial in my hand. A weapon of ink. I uncapped it slowly. Jenny leaned forward, her eyes glued to the tip of the pen. She was holding her breath. She was counting the money. She was already spending that $2.4 million in her head, paying off her debts, buying her way back into high society. Greg was practically panting behind me. I could smell his sweat, sour and acrid. I lowered the pen to the paper. My hand hovered over the signature line. The air in the room was so tight, it felt like it would snap. You promise, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You promise you will take care of Catherine. Yes, Jenny said quickly. Yes, Dad. The best care. Just sign it. And the house, I asked. You will not sell it right away. It has so many memories. We will keep it as long as we can. Greg lied smoothly. We want you to be happy, Tom. Lies. All lies. I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen. I looked at the date at the top of the page. My hand started to shake. I let the pen tip touch the paper, leaving a small black dot of ink. Do it, Greg whispered. Do it now. I took a deep breath. I gripped the pen tighter. I am sorry, I whispered. Jenny smiled, thinking I was apologizing for the delay. It is okay, Dad, she said. Just sign. No, I said. I looked up at her, and for the first time that night, I let the mask slip. I let the frailty vanish. I let the trembling stop. I looked at her with the cold, hard eyes of the man who had built bridges and survived storms. I am not apologizing to you, I said, my voice steady and strong. I am apologizing to myself for raising a monster. I lifted the pen from the paper. I did not sign. Instead, I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the stack of photos I had printed from the security cameras. I think we need to look at a different set of documents, I said. I fanned the photos out on top of the legal contract, covering the signature line with images of their crimes. The first photo showed Jenny slapping Catherine. The second showed Greg kicking the food tray. The third showed Catherine bound with zip ties. The room went silent. A dead, terrible silence. What is this? Jenny whispered, her face turning white. This, I said, standing up slowly, pushing my chair back. This is why you are not getting a dime. And this is why neither of you is leaving this house tonight. Greg lunged for the photos. Where did you get these? He screamed. But I was already moving. I stepped back away from the table, away from the reach of his desperate hands. Happy anniversary, kids, I said. Welcome to the party. And then I saw the realization hit them. I saw the greed in their eyes turn to confusion and then to pure, unadulterated terror. The trap had been sprung. The cage door was open, and they had walked right into it. I pressed the nib of the heavy brass pen into the paper. The ink flowed dark and permanent. But I did not write my name. I did not write Thomas Bennett. With slow, deliberate strokes that carved into the paper like a chisel into stone, I wrote 2 words in massive block letters that filled the entire signature block. Account empty. I lifted the pen and set it down on the table with a metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Jenny stared at the page. Her brow furrowed in confusion, as if she was trying to read a foreign language. She blinked once, then twice. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Dad, you made a mistake. You wrote... I did not make a mistake, I interrupted, my voice low and steady. The mistake was thinking you could walk into my house and steal my life without me noticing. Greg leaned over, grabbing the document. He read the words, and his face turned a shade of gray I had only seen on corpses. Account empty, he whispered. What do you mean, account empty? We saw the bank book. We saw the balance. $2.4 million. It is a fake, Greg, I said, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. I printed it this afternoon, just like you printed that fake medical report about your mother. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. The hope, the arrogance, the greed all evaporated, leaving behind the cold vacuum of reality. You are lying, Jenny shrieked. You have money. You have the pension. You have the insurance. I have them, I said. But you will never touch a cent of them, because I know what you did. I reached for the stack of photos I had placed face down on the table. I picked them up and fanned them out like a winning poker hand. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed them across the table. They slid over the roast beef and the salad, landing right in front of them. Look at them, I commanded. Jenny looked down. The first photo was a high-definition still frame of her face twisted in rage. her hand raised to strike her mother. The second was Catherine cowering on the floor. The third was Greg laughing as he kicked the food tray. I watched their faces. I wanted to see shame. I wanted to see regret. But I did not see either. I saw panic. I saw everything I said, my voice rising just a fraction, filled with the cold fire of justice. I saw every slap, Jenny. I saw every time you pulled her hair. I saw every time you denied her water. I heard every cruel word you spit at the woman who spent her life loving you. You thought no one was watching. You thought because I was in Vancouver and the curtains were drawn, you could be monsters in the dark. But the dark has eyes, Jenny, and I have been watching you for 14 days. It is not what it looks like, Jenny stammered, backing away from the table. The camera angle. It is misleading. Mom was having an episode. I was trying to restrain her. Stop it, I snapped, slamming my hand on the table, making the wine glasses jump. Do not you dare lie to me, not anymore. I saw the zip ties, I saw the lock. That was not care. That was torture. And you did it for money. You did it because you are broke and you needed to pay off Greg's loan sharks before Monday. Greg's head snapped up. His eyes were wide and wild like a trapped animal. You know about Omega Capital, he rasped. I know everything, Greg, I said. I know about the crypto scam. I know about the $450,000. I know that if you do not pay them by tomorrow noon, they are going to hurt you. And guess what? You are not going to pay them, because I am not giving you a dime. The transition was instant. Greg went from a terrified man to a dangerous one. The veneer of civilization peeled away. He looked at the clock on the wall. He looked at the photos that would send him to prison. He looked at me, the old man standing between him and survival. He let out a guttural growl and reached into his pocket. There was a metallic snap, and a 3-inch blade flashed in the light of the chandelier. It was a switchblade, the kind a coward carries to feel tough. Jenny gasped, but she did not move to stop him. She stood there watching, calculating. Shut up, Greg yelled at her, saliva flying from his mouth. He turned the knife toward me. You think you are smart, old man, Greg hissed, moving around the table. You think you can play games with my life. Those guys will kill me. Do you understand? They will kill me. Then you should not have borrowed money. You could not pay back, I said. I did not move. I did not flinch. I sat there looking at the knife as if it were a toy. Sign the paper! Greg screamed, waving the knife inches from my face. I do not care if the account is empty. We will sell the house. We will sell the cars. Sign the power of attorney now, or I swear to God I will send you to meet your wife in hell. I looked past the blade at my daughter. Jenny was standing by the sideboard. She was not screaming for him to stop. She was not calling the police. She was watching. Her eyes were cold and hard. She was running the numbers in her head. If Greg killed me, she would be the sole heir. If Greg went to prison, she would play the victim. In either scenario, she saw a path to survival. She was an accomplice to her own father's murder, and she was okay with it. That realization hurt more than the knife ever could. It severed the last thread of attachment I had to her. The little girl on the bicycle was dead. The woman standing there was a stranger. You want me to sign? I asked, looking back at Greg. Yes, he shouted, lunging forward, grabbing my collar with his free hand. Sign it now. I looked him in the eye. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. I saw the tremor in his hand. He was weak. He was a bully who had only ever hurt people who could not fight back. He had hurt my wife because she was frail. He thought he could hurt me because I was old. But he forgot one thing. I was not just an old man. I was a father who had just seen his child turn into a monster, and I had prepared for this moment. You want the money, Greg, I said softly. Yes, he spat. It is downstairs, I lied. In the basement. In the floor safe. That is where I keep the cash. 200,000. It is yours if you want it. Greg froze. The greed warred with the rage in his eyes. Show me, he said, pressing the knife against my throat. We are going down there. And if you try anything, I will bleed you like a pig. I stood up slowly, my hands raised in surrender. Okay, I said. You win. Let us go to the basement. I walked toward the hallway leading them to the slaughter. Jenny followed close behind. She wanted to make sure she got her share. They fell into formation just like I knew they would. Driven by greed, blinded by desperation, marching straight into the dark where I had prepared their judgment. I glanced at the photos left on the table. The image of Catherine's face seemed to give me strength. Come on, children, I thought. Come into my parlor. The blade of the switchblade pressed against the loose skin of my neck, a cold and sharp reminder of just how far my family had fallen. I could smell Greg's fear. It was a sour, biting odor that mixed with the expensive cologne he wore to mask his failures. He prodded me in the back, forcing me to walk faster toward the hallway that led to the basement. Move it, old man, he hissed, his breath hot on my ear. If you are stalling, I swear I will cut you right here and drag you down the stairs myself. I stumbled slightly, dragging my left foot as if my hip was giving out. It was a performance I had been refining since they walked in the door, but now the stakes were absolute. If I moved too fast, he would get suspicious. If I moved too slow, his panic might make his hand slip and slice my jugular. I had to find the perfect rhythm of a defeated, broken father, leading his executioners to the treasure. It is downstairs, I wheezed, raising my hands in surrender. Under the old workbench. There is a floor safe. I poured the concrete myself. No one knows it is there. Jenny was right behind us. I could hear the click of her heels on the hardwood floor. She was not trying to stop him. She was not crying. She was shadowing us like a vulture waiting for the kill. She wanted to make sure Greg did not pocket the cash and run. Her greed had overridden her survival instinct, and that was exactly what I was counting on. We passed the living room where photos of Jenny's graduation still hung on the wall. We passed the kitchen where she used to bake cookies with her mother. Now we were walking down the corridor of judgment. Open it, Greg commanded when we reached the heavy wooden door. I reached for the key in my pocket. My hands shook partly from the act and partly from the adrenaline dumping into my system. I fumbled with the lock. Hurry up, Jenny snapped from behind. Stop playing games, Dad. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. The door swung outward, revealing the gaping maw of the basement. A blast of cold, damp air rushed up to meet us. It carried the scent of mildew and the lingering odor of the ammonia I had used to clean up Catherine's misery. It was the smell of a dungeon. Greg peered into the darkness. I had deliberately left the lights off down there. Where is the light switch? He demanded. The bulb burned out, I lied. My voice trembling. You have to use your phone flashlight. The safe is in the back corner under the tarp. Greg pulled out his phone with his free hand and clicked on the light. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the steep wooden stairs that led down into the abyss. You go first, Greg said, waving the knife at me. I hesitated. This was the critical moment. If I went down those stairs, I was a dead man. I had to get him to pass me. I cannot, I stammered, clutching the doorframe. My knees. I cannot do the stairs in the dark, Greg. I will fall. Just go. It is right there. 200,000 in cash. Just take it and leave us alone. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He wanted a human shield, but he wanted the money more. He looked at the dark stairs. He looked at me, a frail old man clinging to the woodwork. He made a calculation. He figured I was too weak to try anything. He figured he could run down, grab the cash, and run back up before I could even catch my breath. Fine, he spat. Stay there. but if you move an inch, I will gut you." Greg stepped past me. He stepped onto the landing, his eyes fixed on the bottom of the stairs, his mind already spending the money he thought was waiting for him. Then Jenny moved. She tried to squeeze past me too. "Wait for me," she said, pushing against my arm. "I am not letting you go down there alone, Greg." They were bunched together now right at the top of the staircase. Two greedy rats fighting over a piece of cheese that did not exist. I stopped shaking. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air of my home. In college, I played linebacker for the University of Illinois. I was not the fastest player on the field, but I was the hardest hitter. Coach Miller used to tell me that leverage is everything. Low center of gravity, explosive power, drive through the target. I had not tackled anyone in 40 years, but muscle memory is a strange thing. It does not forget. As Greg took the first step down and Jenny crowded behind him, I dropped my shoulder. I did not shove them with my hands. I threw my entire body weight into Greg's hip. It was a clean hit. A perfect tackle. Greg let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. His center of gravity vanished. His foot slipped off the edge of the stair. He flailed his arms wildly, dropping the knife and the phone. He grabbed the nearest thing to save himself, which happened to be Jenny's pearl necklace. No, Jenny shrieked. Greg fell backward and he took her with him. It happened in slow motion, and yet it was over in a heartbeat. They tumbled into the darkness. It was a chaotic tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. I heard the sickening thud of bodies hitting wood, then concrete. I heard the crack of bone. I heard a scream that was cut short by the impact with the floor. They landed in a heap at the bottom of the stairs, right where they had forced Catherine to sleep. I did not wait to see if they were moving. I grabbed the heavy steel door handle. I swung it shut with every ounce of strength I possessed. The door slammed into the frame with a sound like a thunderclap. It was a solid final sound, the sound of a prison cell closing. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I engaged the secondary lock I had installed yesterday. Click. I spun the dial on the security bar. Clank. Silence. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence in the hallway. Then the screaming started. "Let us out!" Greg howled. His voice was muffled by the reinforced steel, but I could hear the pain in it. "My leg! Oh God, my leg! Dad!" Jenny screamed. "Dad, open the door. It is dark. Please open the door." I leaned my back against the wood. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My legs, which had held steady during the attack, finally gave out. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my legs sprawled out in front of me. I listened to them. I listened to the people who had eaten my food and spent my money and tortured my wife. They were banging on the door now. Dull, heavy thuds that vibrated against my spine. "You are crazy," Greg yelled. "You are a crazy old man. Open this door or I will kill you." "You cannot kill me, Greg," I whispered to the empty hallway. "You are in the box now." I looked at my hands. They were trembling again, but not from fear, from the sheer overwhelming grief of what I had just done. I had just locked my own daughter in a dungeon. I had done to her exactly what she had done to her mother. Is this what justice feels like? It did not feel like victory. It felt like amputation. It felt like I had just cut off my own arm to save the rest of my body from gangrene. "Dad." Please, Jenny was sobbing now. "I am sorry. We are sorry. We will sign the papers. We will do whatever you want. Just let us out." I closed my eyes and let the tears come. They were hot and fast, streaming down my cheeks into my gray beard. I remembered the little girl on the bicycle. I remembered the day she was born. I remembered the first time she said, "Daddy." "Goodbye, Jenny," I whispered. I sat there for a long time listening to their pleas turn into threats, and then back into pleas, until finally they were just exhausted sobs echoing up from the cold, dark earth. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I stood up using the door handle for support. My knees popped. My back ached. I felt every single one of my 70 years. I looked at the locks one last time. They were holding. The engineering was sound. "It is finished," I said aloud. I turned my back on the door and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. I had one more phone call to make. The police were waiting for my signal. But I needed a minute. Just 1 minute to mourn the family I had lost before I let the world know that the monsters had been caught. I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the refrigerator, but my peripheral vision was filled with a pulsating rhythm of blue and red light washing over the snow-covered lawn outside. The silent alarm had done its job. There were no sirens wailing to alert the neighbors, just the heavy, confident crunch of tactical boots on the frozen walkway and the swift click of the front door latch. Sheriff Mike Miller stepped into the hallway first. He was a big man, with a face carved from granite. But when he saw me sitting there clutching the door handle like a lifeline, his expression softened into something profound and sad. He did not ask what happened. He saw the photos scattered on the dining table. He saw the open switchblade lying on the floor where Greg had dropped it. He saw the exhaustion etched into every line of my face. Tom Mike said softly, holstering his weapon. "We have it from here. You can let go of the door now." I looked at my hand. My fingers were white, locked onto the steel handle in a death grip. I had to consciously tell my muscles to release. When I finally let go, my hand fell to my side like a dead weight. 2 deputies moved past me, their movements efficient and synchronized. They took positions on either side of the basement door, weapons drawn, but low, ready for whatever was waiting in the dark. Mike nodded to the lead deputy, a giant of a man named Kowalski. "Open it." Kowalski threw the deadbolt back. The sound echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. He disengaged the secondary lock and pulled the heavy steel door open. The smell wafted up instantly. It was the smell of fear and sweat, and the dank misery of the basement. But this time it was not my wife suffering down there. "Get up," Kowalski barked into the darkness. "Keep your hands where we can see them and move slowly toward the light." For a moment, there was only the sound of whimpering. Then came the shuffling of feet on the wooden stairs. Greg appeared first. He looked nothing like the arrogant man who had toasted with expensive champagne an hour ago. His designer shirt was torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt. He was limping heavily, dragging his right leg, which twisted at an unnatural angle. His face was a mask of snot and tears. He was trembling so violently that he could barely hold his hands above his head. "Don't shoot," Greg blubbered, his voice cracking. "He is crazy. The old man is crazy. He threw us down the stairs. I need a doctor. My leg is broken." The deputies did not offer sympathy. They grabbed him by the arms and hauled him into the hallway. Greg screamed as his weight shifted onto his injured leg, but they forced him against the wall, kicking his legs apart to search him. Jenny came up next. Seeing her broke whatever was left of my heart. She had lost a shoe. Her black dress was covered in gray dust. Her pearl necklace, the one Greg had grabbed as he fell, was broken, hanging by a single thread. She looked small. She looked young. But then she looked at me and I saw the hate in her eyes. It was not the look of a repentant child. It was the look of a gambler who is furious that the house won. "Daddy," she wailed, trying to rush toward me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we were just leaving." She did not get far. A female deputy stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the deputy ordered. "No, you don't understand," Jenny screamed, struggling as the deputy spun her around. "This is my house. That is my father. He is having a breakdown. He locked us in there." The click of the handcuffs cutting off her protest was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up to entitlement. The front door opened again, and George Harrison walked in. My lawyer was wearing his long wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked at the scene, the weeping daughter and the groaning son-in-law, and his face remained completely impassive. He walked over to where Mike stood and handed him a thick stack of documents. Sheriff George said, his voice crisp and professional. "Here are the signed affidavits from Mr. Bennett regarding the assault on his wife. Also included is the digital evidence from the security cameras showing 14 counts of elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and assault with a deadly weapon. And here is the temporary restraining order signed by Judge Reynolds 20 minutes ago, barring both of these individuals from coming within 500 feet of Thomas or Catherine Bennett." Mike took the papers and scanned them. He looked at Greg, who was currently being patted down by Kowalski. "Gregory Bennett," Mike said, his voice booming in the small hallway. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping and torture of Catherine Bennett, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted extortion." "Torture!" Greg shrieked, twisting his head to look at us. "I didn't torture anyone. We were taking care of her. It was assisted living." "Assisted living involving zip ties and starvation," Mike said dryly. "Save it for the judge, son." Suddenly, Kowalski stiffened. He had been patting down Greg's jacket pocket. He reached in and pulled out a small, clear plastic baggie. Inside were jagged, cloudy crystals that caught the light of the hallway chandelier. "Well, well, well," Kowalski said, holding the bag up. "Look what we have here, Sheriff." Greg's face went from pale to translucent. He stopped struggling. He stopped breathing. He knew that this was the nail in his coffin. I looked at the bag. Crystal meth. It made sense. The paranoia, the erratic mood swings, the desperate need for cash to pay off loan sharks. He wasn't just a bad investor. He was an addict. He had brought drugs into my house. He had been high while he was kicking my wife's food tray. "That changes things," Mike said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "possession of a controlled substance. And since you brought this into a home where a vulnerable adult resides, we are adding a jagged enhancement to the charges. You are looking at 20 years, Greg. Minimum." Greg slumped against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably. He was finished. The deputies began to march them toward the door. Jenny was fighting against the cuffs, twisting her body to look back at me. "Dad, please," she begged, the tears streaming down her face, washing away her expensive makeup. "Do not let them take me. I am your daughter. I am your Jenny. Mom wouldn't want this. She would forgive me." I pushed myself off the wall. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to move. I walked past Greg, who was too busy crying about his leg to look at me. I walked straight up to Jenny. The deputy paused, letting me have this moment. I looked into her eyes. I searched for any trace of the girl I had raised. I looked for the toddler who used to fall asleep on my chest. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive. But they were gone. All I saw was a stranger who had worn my daughter's face as a mask to hide a monster. "You said Mom was sick," I said, my voice soft, but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You told the doctors she had dementia. You told me she was violent. You tried to convince the world that the woman who loved you more than life itself had lost her mind." Jenny sniffled, a flicker of hope in her eyes, thinking I was engaging with her, thinking she could still manipulate me. "She is sick, Dad," Jenny whispered. "We can get her help. Just tell them to let me go and we will get her the best doctors." I leaned in close. I wanted her to remember this whisper for the rest of her life in prison. I wanted it to be the last thing she heard from her father. "The court is going to see the videos, Jenny," I whispered. "They are going to see you slapping her. They are going to see you laughing while she begged for water. And when the judge watches those tapes, he is going to decide who the real crazy person is. He is going to see who really lost their mind when they decided to go to war with me." I pulled back and looked at the deputy. "Get them out of my house." No, Jenny screamed as they dragged her through the door. Daddy, no. I watched them go. I watched the flashing lights illuminate their shame as they were shoved into the back of the squad cars. I watched Greg being loaded into an ambulance under police guard. I stood in the open doorway, letting the freezing wind hit my face. It felt clean. It felt pure. It washed away the smell of their perfume and their lies. Harrison stepped up beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It is over, Tom," he said. "We have them dead to rights. The drugs were just the cherry on top. They are never going to hurt Catherine again." I nodded. I watched the taillights of the police cruisers disappear around the bend. I closed the front door. The lock clicked shut. The house was quiet again. But it was not the terrifying silence of earlier. It was the peaceful silence of a fortress that had held the line. I was alone. My body ached. My heart was bruised. But I was standing. I turned to Harrison. "Take me to the hospital, George," I said. "My wife is waiting for me, and I have a lot of apologizing to do for raising the people who hurt her." We walked out to his car, leaving the empty house behind. The basement door was open now. The trap was sprung. The rats were caught. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I could finally breathe. The sun here in Sedona is different from the sun in Chicago. It does not just provide light, it provides a kind of deep healing heat that seems to penetrate right through the skin and into the bones. I was sitting on the patio of our new hacienda-style bungalow, watching the red rocks glow in the late afternoon light. The air smelled of sagebrush and dry earth, a stark contrast to the mildew and damp cold of the basement that had haunted my nightmares for months. Across the patio, Catherine was working with her physical therapist. She was sitting in her wheelchair, but she was lifting small weights with her arms. Her movements were slow and deliberate, but they were steady. The bruises on her wrists had faded into faint white scars, lines that looked like thin bracelets, reminding us of where we had been. But the terror in her eyes was gone. When she successfully completed a set of exercises, she looked over at me and smiled. It was a genuine smile. It was the smile of a woman who knows she is safe. I looked down at the envelope in my lap. It was plain white with a stamped return address from the Illinois State Correctional Center. It had arrived this morning. I had debated whether to open it. Part of me wanted to throw it directly into the fire pit. But the engineer in me, the man who needs to know the data before making a decision, made me slice it open with my pocket knife. I pulled out the single sheet of lined yellow paper. The handwriting was familiar but shaky, scrawled with a pencil. "Dad," it began. "I am having a hard time in here. The commissary is expensive, and I need money for better food and toiletries. Greg is in a different block, and he says he is going to appeal, but I do not have a lawyer. I know you are angry, but please, I am your daughter. You cannot just leave me here with nothing. Send a check, please." There was no apology. There was no inquiry about her mother's health. There was no remorse for the torture she had inflicted or the pain she had caused. There was only the same old song. Me, me, me. Give me money. Give me help. She was still the same person. Prison had not changed her, it had only contained her. I stood up and walked over to the outdoor fireplace where a small fire was crackling to ward off the evening chill. I held the letter by the corner. I watched the flames lick at the bottom of the yellow paper. I watched the words curl and blacken. I watched the plea for money turn into ash and float up into the desert sky. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of release. The cord was cut. The debt was paid. I turned back to the table where a thick stack of legal documents sat. They were the final closing papers for the sale of the house in Chicago. We had sold it for more than asking price to a young couple who promised to fill it with children and laughter. I hoped they would scrub away the bad memories we left behind. But the most important document was the one underneath the closing papers. It was a deed of trust. I had kept my promise to myself. I had liquidated everything. The stocks, the bonds, the vintage car collection. I had taken every penny of the fortune that Jenny and Greg had tried to kill for, and I had locked it away in an irrevocable trust. This trust had one purpose: to ensure that Catherine would have the best care for the rest of her life, no matter what happened to me. If I died tomorrow, she would have 24-hour nursing care, private chefs, and the finest medical treatment available until the day she passed. No one could touch it, no judge could break it, and certainly no greedy relatives could steal it. The remainder of the funds, the money that would be left over after we were both gone, was designated for a new purpose. I had established the Bennett Foundation for Elder Justice. It would fund legal defense for seniors who were being exploited by their families. It would pay for investigators to install cameras in homes where abuse was suspected. It would be the shield that I wished I had sooner. I walked over to Catherine. The therapist was packing up her equipment. "Good session today, Mr. Bennett," the therapist said, beaming. "She is getting stronger every day. I think she might be ready to try walking with the parallel bars next week." "Thank you," I said, shaking her hand. When we were alone, I sat on the low wall beside Catherine's wheelchair. I took her hand. Her skin was soft again, thanks to the lotions and the desert climate. "Who was the letter from Tom?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. I looked at the pile of ash in the fireplace. "It was just junk mail," I lied. "Someone trying to sell us something we do not need." She squeezed my hand. She knew. Of course she knew. But she also knew that I had handled it. That I would always handle it. We sat there in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was everything we had worked for 40 years to achieve. I thought about the journey that brought us here. I thought about the betrayal that had almost destroyed us. For a long time I had asked myself why. Why did my own blood turn against me? Why did the child I raised become a monster? But looking at the sunset, I realized that the why did not matter anymore. Only the now mattered. We are taught from the time we are born that family is everything. We are told that blood is thicker than water. But that is a dangerous lie. Blood is just biology. Family is behavior. Family is the people who respect you. The people who care for you when you are sick. The people who would never ever hurt you for a dollar sign. I had lost a daughter, but I had saved my wife. I had lost my old home, but I had found a sanctuary. I had lost my innocence, but I had found my strength. "Tom," Catherine said, breaking my reverie. "Yes, dear, I am happy," she whispered. Tears pricked my eyes. Those 3 words were worth more than all the money in the world. They were worth the pain. They were worth the fight. "Me too," I said. "Me too." I leaned over and kissed her forehead. "We are going to be okay, Catherine," I said. "We are finally free." As the stars began to come out over the desert, I felt a weight lift off my soul. The nightmare was over. The monsters were in cages, and we were here together, standing in the light. Life does not always give you a happy ending. Sometimes you have to build it yourself with a sledgehammer and a lot of courage. But looking at my wife's smile, I knew that I had built something that would last forever. This is Tom Bennett, signing off from Arizona. Thank you for listening to my story. Here is the lesson I want you to take away from my journey. We often ignore the red flags in our relationships because we are blinded by love and history. We think that because we changed their diapers or paid for their college, they owe us loyalty. But entitlement does not know gratitude. If you sense that something is wrong, trust your gut. If you feel like you are being used, do not be afraid to say no. Protect your dignity and your assets with the same ferocity that you protect your children. Because at the end of the day, the only people who deserve a seat at your table are the ones who bring love, not a knife, to the feast. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might need a wake-up call. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about real people fighting back against injustice. I want to know what you would have done in my shoes, so leave a comment below. Stay safe, stay strong, and never let anyone steal your peace. See you in the next video.